This is a More Than Just Podcast production.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 374 of the More Than Just Code podcast. My name is Tim Mitchell. I am in Toronto, Ontario, and I'm joined by Dave Verwer in near Manchester. Let's leave it at that.
That's close enough, yeah. Hi Tim, how you doing?
I'm good. So I was actually going to talk about the mispronunciations of our last names.
Right.
So my last name is Mitra, but people say Mitra, Mitra. I've heard Mitchell. I've heard all kinds of other things, and you, I've heard your name pronounced a number of different ways. So for the audience,
I've heard them all. Yeah.
and so what is the correct pronunciation?
Oh, the correct pronunciation is it's exactly as it's spelled, which is just Verwer, but everyone mixes up the V and the W in the middle, and that's the most common mispronunciation. I've also seen every possible spelling of it, which is there are some wonderful ones. Yeah.
What's the genesis of the name? Like, where does it come from?
It's Dutch, actually.
Oh, okay, cool.
So we don't have any current kind of relations in the Netherlands, but a few generations back, well, of course we do, but we're just not in touch with them, of course. Yeah, it was a few generations back that the family came over here. When I was younger, my grandmother did a search to see if there were any other Verwers in the UK, and at the time there weren't, but I'm sure that's changed now.
Have you done the Ancestry DNA thing at all, or are you interested in that?
I haven't, actually, although my dad was talking about something similar the other day, so I think he may be just about to get the bug to do that. Right,
yeah, so I did that because, you know, I always thought I was half Indian, quarter Irish, quarter English. I was born in St. Albans in the UK, and that's why I have this crazy accent. I came over here when I was 6.
My dad, actually, talking of my dad grew up in St. Albans.
Oh, no way. Yeah, well, my parents, my dad and my mum were living there for a couple of years because 2 of us were born there, and then off to London and on to India and then to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the Genesis thing. Yeah, so I did my ancestry stuff, and my wife is half Irish as well. So we were in Ireland in 2021, I think. And 2022, actually, beginning of 2022. And so I've been following my ancestry stuff because the DNA result was that I'm mostly Indian, but like a little bit of Scottish, a little bit of Irish. And there's some people from the mainland that came over. And I was surprised to find out that I always thought my grandmother, Anne Williams, was Irish by birth. But she was by birth, but her father was actually from Scotland. And so Curran is the actual Irish line that I'm descended from. So it was kind of interesting to find that out. And like my mother's brother's family and her moved over here. So I don't have any direct relatives in the UK. I shouldn't say that. My nephew Tim lives in Bath right now, but he's from Ottawa. But yeah, so that's sort of my. It's interesting. It's interesting to sort of figure out where you come from and. You know, I think at this, I guess as you get on in age, you want to figure out where people came from and that kind of stuff. Anyway, yeah. So one of the things I want to talk about is so I've recently been laid off. I was working as an engineering manager for the last couple of years, but before going into working full time, I did that because of the indie apocalypse. You know, the collapse of the indie culture when the prices of apps came down in 2015, and all of us had to go scramble looking for full-time work, right? So I'm back to being an indie developer. So I'm kind of curious, like you on your moniker, on your social networking, on your blogs and stuff, you describe yourself as an indie. And so I'm kind of curious, like how do you see the life of an indie developer these days?
So it's interesting. I do describe myself as, maybe I do describe myself as an independent developer even, but a lot of what I've done as that independent, to me, I think the reason I wrote that is more the independent than the independent developer, because I have never supported myself off apps on the store. That has not been something that I ever kind of went down that route. I had some experiments with it we did some apps. We've had apps. In fact, I have an app on the store right now, but it's a free app. But what instead I do is a lot of stuff around independent developers, and so I guess I describe myself as one of the group, even though I don't actually earn my money through selling that, a piece of software or something like that. So when I first started out as being independent, I did do some apps, but the money came in from running training courses and consulting and that kind of stuff, and so as my career kind of progressed through, I stayed independent, but it was less around the kind of
the indie app store.
I guess I'm an imposter independent developer.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think it's just another way of saying, like, you're almost like an entrepreneur. I use, as you mentioned, consultant. So do you do contract work? Is that how you sort of pay the bills?
I have done, yeah. And then iOS Dev Weekly brings in the majority of my income. Actually, the advertising nice. In iOS Dev Weekly is the majority of my kind of income into being independent. And again, I do that independently, and that's more writing about development rather than doing it.
Yeah. Well, I think, reason why we do more than just code is the three of us want to share our knowledge with the community, right? It's sort of a giving back to the community kind of thing. Well, let's I'll come back to iOS Dev Weekly in a few minutes, but
sure.
Tell us about your sort of, how did you get into iOS? Did you study computer science? How did you get to being a developer?
I did. So I did a software engineering degree at university, and came out of that and got a job at a local it wasn't local to where I was, but it's local to where I am now. So I moved to, as I say, kind of back to near Manchester, which is where I grew up, and got a job. And that was, so this was 96 when I graduated. So we're going back a little way. And the iPhone was certainly not a thing back then. And I did a lot of, actually, Microsoft technology development for the beginning part of my career. Started off doing a lot of Ball and Delphi, which I still have a very fond place in my heart for Ball and Delphi. It was an amazing tool. And then through the Microsoft stack and into web development with the Microsoft, various Microsoft technologies, C#, that kind of thing. And then I kind of got interested in Rails when that first popped up, so really early Rails, like 0.5, 0.6 Rails, something like that, and it was an interesting technology. I was also getting a little tired of where I was in my career at that point, and the stars aligned a little bit, and I decided, I'm going to start doing some Rails stuff, and I learned it on my own and in my spare time, and there were a couple of pieces of software actually that made me try a Mac, and that was, you may remember the very famous David Heinemeier Hansson demo when he launched up TextMate and built a blog with Rails in like 3 minutes or something like that. It was a video that, a lot of people saw it at the time. It was a great demo, really great demo, and actually, what stood out, he didn't talk about TextMate, but TextMate really shone in that demo. And then I was at a conference a little while later. It was eTech conference in San Diego, and I walked into the room in this conference, and everybody. Well, first of all, everyone had a Mac, which was not something I was used to seeing. And as I was sitting in the audience, I noticed that everybody was collaboratively editing conference notes, and so I started chatting with one of the people who was next to me, and I said, what's even going on? And it was Sub-Ether-Edit, which you may remember, is a kind of Bonjour compatible editor. And before I even left San Diego, I'd gone to the Apple Store and bought a MacBook Pro.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah. So there were a few reasons. It was a Ruby and Rails ran better on OS 10 than it did on Windows. And then the tooling and the kind of environment around it, and they just switched to Intel. So this was actually 2006 when I did this, or maybe late 2005, whenever the first Intel ones came out. And I think my MacBook Pro was like week 2 of production of the Intel MacBook Pros. Like, it was right at the beginning.
On the bleeding
edge. And I
edge,
kind of figured, well,
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it did actually. The battery did explode at one point. But I remember thinking, well, if this experiment doesn't work, it's an Intel machine. I'm sure I'll be able to install Windows on it. And never tried, and never looked back really. So that was a rather long-winded answer to the question, but a kind of an indirect path through to Apple development, because once I had that machine, I then started looking at, what's this Objective-C thing? Let's see if I can make an app, and started to write a Mac application, and then the iPhone got announced, and the rest is history.
Right. Yeah, I was gonna ask how you got into iOS specifically, but I guess you just answered that. That's cool. Yeah.
Well, it was curiosity. You know, I had never heard of Objective-C before getting the machine, and looked at Xcode. It was Xcode 3 at the time, so the one that still had all the different windows.
Yep.
And I was curious about it. I had been a C developer, earlier in my career, and so I knew a little bit of C. Objective-C, it was okay. It was
They're cousins, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I picked it up reasonably quickly, and then I loved it. Really loved it.
Cool. Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned a couple of signposts there for me. Is that I've been a Mac user for forever, and for the longest time, probably about the first, until the iPhone came out, and maybe a few years after that, it wasn't super popular to be a Mac guy in a Windows environment. I mean, I did my stints I was working as a consultant, so I did my stint supporting Windows NT and suffering through 95 and all that, but all the while being a Mac user and suffering abuse from people. And when you mentioned 96, that was kind of the return of Steve Jobs era, and Apple being for sale for, Sun was going to buy them for like $500 million or something ridiculous, and all that kind of. I wish I'd bought stock back then, to be honest with you. For me, the iPhone. I had read Dave Mark's book on C on the Mac, and I'd learned all that kind of stuff. And working in classic Mac was a little daunting. I'm curious. Like, did you ever get anywhere with that Mac app you wrote, or how far did you get into it, where you were writing?
We released it, and it was. It did okay. It was actually, I saw an app that had almost exactly the same functionality just a short while ago. So the app was called Speakapedia, and it was an app that would grab the text from a Wikipedia page, pass out, get rid of all the tables, get rid of everything that wasn't the copy, and use the text-to-speech to turn it into a podcast that you could then sync into your iTunes. So it was still the old cable syncs at that point, but it would make you little podcasts, and it would split them into chapters with each section of the page, so you could listen to Wikipedia articles. And yeah, we took that through to release, and it did great. And that was before the iPhone. We started that before the iPhone got announced,
right?
But I think we released it just after the announcement, so it kind of spanned that period of
2007.
The iPhone was announced 2007, right?
Yeah. So are you do you consider yourself an old school podcaster in that sense, or did you do any podcasting back in the early days?
No, it was only through text to speech at that point.
And did it actually?
I do now do a podcast.
Oh, do you? What's your podcast?
Sorry, go on.
No. Tell me what your podcast.
So we have a podcast for the Swift Package Index where we talk about the development of whatever we're working on at the moment, and we also recommend packages from around the community. So, but that's only been going for the last year and a bit, something like that.
So that's a good segue. Let's talk about Swift Package Manager for a minute, because you know, we, as you may or may not know, on More Than Just Code, we occasionally, like the three of us, have a pick or two that we kind of, at the end of the show, we kind of talk about. And I know the Swift Package Index has been one of our picks. Mine, maybe Jaime picked it. So we've been following you along, and it's almost like, I think it's official now with Swift.org. Maybe why don't you tell us a little bit about Swift Package Manager, how it got started, and where it is. And again,
sure
like
thing.
our show, you kind of bootstrapped that. You brought that up yourself, right?
Right. Yeah. So actually, Swift Package Index is almost the second iteration of what I've built around that. So it started in 2019. I was thinking about Swift Package Manager, and at the time it didn't support iOS applications. But I could see that was coming. Like all the ducks were aligning in a row to. It was very obvious that it was one day. Of course, it was going to one day support iOS applications. Why would it exist if that was not the eventual plan? And at the time, of course, CocoaPods was entirely, actually not entirely dominant, because there was Carthage and Git submodules, but CocoaPods was certainly the kind of industry standard.
It was the standard, yep.
And they had, or still have, a kind of search engine as part of CocoaPods, but I kind of saw, like, if Package Manager is going to come in and if it gains any traction, that's going to be a tricky thing to manage. So maybe the Package Manager needs its own search engine. And I put together what I now call a prototype, really, because it was, at the time, I considered it fully featured, but but now, looking back, it was definitely just a prototype of something that downloaded package Git repositories, parsed out the manifest, grabbed some metadata out of it, put it in a database, and let a client kind of query that database. So that was called SwiftPM Library, and that was launched in 2019. And that was actually written with Rails. Written in Ruby, running on Rails. And because that was my most comfortable server environment. I've done a lot of Objective-C and Swift development on the client, but my go-to for server-side development was always Rails, because that was what I knew, and it's a great. I love it. It's a great framework. I still enjoy Rails. And then that kind of launched, and it was fine. But I was aware that if it was going to become something bigger than just me working on this little kind of side project on my own, that open source would be a good idea. And if it's going to be open source in the Swift community, it really has to be written in Swift, because it's going to be challenging to run an open source project that is a Swift package index with a
Ruby
backend that isn't written in Swift.
Yeah.
And so, contributions would be few and far between, I think, with that situation. So I started talking to a couple of the Vaper people, and started kind of learning it a little bit, and then got an email from Sven Schmidt, who I didn't know at the time, and he had developed a tool called Arena, which was still is a library that can take a Swift package and create a playground around that Swift package with the package already imported, so that you can just open that playground up and start testing the Swift package.
Cool.
Just an easy way to do that process, right? And he was just out of the blue kind of email to me, and said, "Seen what you've done with SwiftPM Library. I'd like to propose a feature for it, which is next to each package, would you add a button that would launch the Arena process to kind of test the package, right?" And we jumped on a quick call and got chatting, and out of that kind of, I was talking about my thoughts around maybe making it a Vaper application, maybe rewriting it in Swift, and we got on and we started to work on that together. And so the Swift Package Index, it's an entirely new project. The prototype is long gone. It's not even worth talking about anymore. So the Swift Package Index is very much a joint development from both myself and Sven.
Mm-hmm. And then I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's sort of been recognized as the sort of standard with the Swift.org folks, or is that correct?
Yeah, so we've been working recently with Apple to actually integrate some metadata from the Swift Package Index into the Swift.org site. And if you go to swift.org/packages, there's now a page there that will have some package links on a rotating monthly basis, and that will get automatically updated over time. And in fact, that whole process is also community driven. So we're going to, in fact, we already have the thread up and running, and there's details on that page if anyone's interested, where the community can suggest packages that are either talked about in public, like on podcasts or on blogs or newsletters or whatever, or if you just really like a package and would like to recommend that people check it out, then once a month we're going to refresh that list of packages from community suggestions, and there's a Swift forums thread where that's all being gathered. So that's the most recent integration with Swift, but we also secured some funding and support from Apple probably just over a year ago now. I'm actually mixing my dates up. I couldn't tell you exactly. I just think it's about a year ago.
The reason I asked that question is because I believe it was a pick by one of us when we heard that. We saw an announcement.
Oh,
or something.
there we go.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I knew there was an Apple association. That's cool. Congratulations on that officially.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah,
it feels like it feels great to see Apple support a community project, first of all, and if I'm 100% honest, we really needed it, because this, like an open source project, there are lots of different types of open source projects, and open source funding is a complicated topic that we definitely can't cover completely today.
Right.
But even within the scope of open source software and making open source software sustainable, there's a difference between a library that might get compiled into an application, and if there's a bug found in it, then sure, people can report an issue and people will do work, and that is very, very valuable work. But there's a difference between that and having a live site that needs to stay up 24 hours a day.
Right.
And it was the Swift Package Index demands a lot of our time, and we were struggling to make that balance work.
I mean, obviously, I spent the last year working with Swift Package Manager because of my day job, and I've started using it a lot more in my own work. Obviously, having had to deal with Cocoa Pods and Carthage before, so it's kind of nice to have sort of a native Apple-centric kind of approach to doing it. Although there's nothing wrong with Cocoa Pods, I guess. But yeah, so you mentioned in your little discussion there a minute ago the newsletter. So let's talk about iOS Dev Weekly. That's another thing that I think a lot of people would know you from, or should know.
Sure thing, yeah. So that's been going a long time now. It's coming up on 13 years almost since I started writing iOS Dev Weekly, and every Friday for 13 years.
Okay.
So I mean, I do take a week off at over the kind of Christmas New Year period, but apart from that, it's been every Friday. So that was started when I was doing a lot of training. So I ran training courses and that kind of stuff for a little while. It was back in the Objective-C days. That was 2011, and I think there was a couple of reasons behind creating that. I really enjoyed another newsletter which is still going today, which is called Ruby Weekly, and that's written by Peter Cooper, and it was a great format. It was, here's 10 links on the very specific subject that you might find interesting every week. Great idea. And I'm not saying Peter's the first one that came up with that. It's hardly a unique idea, right? But he did and continues to do it really well. And I had met Peter a couple of times, and I think I dropped him an email saying I'm planning to do an iOS version of this, and we had a quick chat back and forth, and I thought, well, I can't find one for iOS, so maybe I can make one for iOS,
Right.
because it was something that I was really interested in, and was already reading all of the blogs and all the stuff myself. So I thought, well, I think I can do this. So started it really very without a lot of preparation. Signed up for a MailChimp account, made a one-page site that had a sign-up form on it, and then wrote an issue and sent it out. I think the whole thing, start to finish, was like 10 days or something like that. It was, I'm going to do this. Oh, I've done it. Okay, what next?
Yeah. And then next week you got to do it again, and the week after that.
You serious?
Yeah.
And certainly wasn't intended to be a money-making vehicle or anything like that. I did have kind of a thought that if it was successful, maybe I could promote like training courses through it, but that was not why I started it. I started it because I thought it was an interesting thing to do, and I thought people might like it, and they did, and it grew really quickly. And yeah, it's still, over the years, I have focused more effort on writing original stuff for it. So I include a comment every week that whatever I find interesting, or whatever's on my mind, that will go into the comment for the week. In fact, just earlier today, I was starting to work on tomorrow's, so because there is one due tomorrow. Yeah, it's kind of grown from there, and it's been opened an enormous number of doors for me, and as I say now, generates income too.
Cool. Yeah. No, I do read the. I don't read it regularly, but I do read it, and I've noticed there seems to be a popular. I guess during the pandemic, a lot of newsletters have started up in a similar format, right? So, it's funny because your newsletter is very similar to our own podcast. We started it just because we wanted to share insights with people, and we were too lazy to write a book, which is why we started the podcast.
Right.
And and it's funny because some of the stories you talk, because you must sort of follow the same things. So a lot of times the stories we would talk about on More Than Just Code would be the same things you would have in your newsletter, which was interesting. And occasionally we find things through your newsletter too. So thank you for that. I think it's great that that's part of the reason why we want to share this kind of information with people is just to better everybody, right? And so thank you on behalf of the community for doing this, regardless of getting paid or not. It's a great service. Every
time someone says that to me, I say thank you for producing the stuff, because if I hadn't had people to link to, then I wouldn't have started it. So and I love kind of sending people out to other people's blogs. I think that's really important, and that's something that's carried through to, as I say, with the Swift Package Indexing podcast. A big part of that was we wanted to share people's packages that they have been working on, and spreading that inside the community is really important to me, and it is just fun as well.
Well, I can tell you, I've talked to Ray Renderlich about this, and I write for him occasionally, and I think we both sort of started from the same point in time, when if you wanted to do something, you had to scour the internet to try and see if somebody had written something similar, and because back in the early days of iOS, there was no, documentation was there on Apple's documentation was pretty good, but it wasn't. It was a lot better than it is today, I gotta say. But it was tough to put together an idea. Like if you wanted to have notifications, or you wanted to have, I can't think of any feature right now, but we would scour. Like my attitude was, for coming from PHP and Ruby and stuff, was somebody must have done this already. So let's scour the internet, see if we can find, and it was tough to find answers, and that's how I stumbled across Ray and his website, and now it's grown into Codico and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was. I think it's important to do that. I do want to touch on the dev directory too. That's another sort of open source thing that you do, and thank you for that, because it's another a great place. Like there are many lists, you know, top 10 this and top 10 that and whatever. Those are sort of what do you call those? You know, where they trap you in a link or whatever. You know, it's not the right term for link. Jaime has the best word for it. I can't remember what it is, but on the iOS Dev directory, you have listed blogs, you've listed podcasts. Thanks for letting us add our podcasts in there, and again, packages and things. So tell the audience a little bit about the iOS Dev directory and what's there, what they can find, and how they can get involved.
Of course. Yeah, so the iOS Dev directory, and the reason I'm smiling is because it always makes me kind of laugh when I tell the story. It was basically me open sourcing my RSS feed workflow. So obviously, for many years, I had been building a set of RSS feeds that I was following of people in the community, because that's generally how I find articles to link to in the newsletter. So it was really important to me to have a way to keep up with the community in a manageable way. And RSS, I still love RSS. It's a terrible shame that it's not as well used as it once was, because the beauty of it is it doesn't matter if somebody takes a break from producing whatever they're producing. That RSS feed is going to stay silent and quiet and not get in anyone's way, and at the point where that person decides to start up again, it's there and waiting. There's nothing like it. Social media definitely doesn't do that job. And so I've always been a great fan of RSS. But obviously that set of feeds was just, you know, collected by me over time, and it wasn't shared anywhere. And I thought, well, maybe I can solicit contributions of RSS feeds so that I find new people to follow without necessarily having to, you know, come across them. And potentially that list might be useful to other people. But if I'm honest, the main reason was to get contributions into my set of RSS feeds. Right, okay. And of course I made it open from day one, but actually the reason I did it was because I wanted to find more people to follow. It was also something that I wanted to make that data file of all of the feeds public, so that the way that I approached that was made it a JSON file, put it in a public open source repository, and allowed people to add pull requests. And I think, in fact, if I just load up the site for a second, there have been 836 merged pull requests to that site now. So that's been going, I think it started in 2017 maybe. Yeah, 800 and something pull requests. And in fact, at the moment, we're one site away from 1,000 total sites on that platform. So if you have a site that isn't there, you could be the 1,000th site. I'd love to announce that there was a big prize for being the 1,000th site, but there isn't.
No free Vision Pro over there.
No free Vision Pro on this in this occasion, unfortunately.
So you have 1,000 sites listed, or 1,000? Because I mean, it's not just it's packages, it's developers, it's podcasts, it's a whole different slew of things, right?
Everything except packages. So it's blogs, it's newsletters, it's podcasts, it's YouTube channels, it's Twitch streams. If it's related to Swift or Apple platform development, it's welcome there. And there's no kind of committee of people choosing who gets on there. Everybody gets on there. If you submit a site and it has an RSS feed and it relates in some way to Swift or Apple platform development, it will be merged. We have company blogs as well as individual blogs, so it's really it is very open and not restrictive with what gets merged at all. And then my RSS process is entirely automated off that site. So that site publishes OPML files, again, publicly. and I have an RSS service that can subscribe to an OPML file. So not just the feeds, but if the underlying OPML changes, it also automatically subscribes or removes from any site in that OPML file. And that's my feed reader.
So that's how you find out what's going on in there, or keep track of it, or?
Yeah, so I subscribe to all the OPML files. Actually, not quite all of them, because the site has multiple languages, and I unfortunately only speak one. So I only subscribe to the English language ones, because I can't consume the other ones. But yeah, I subscribe to all those. Mm-hmm.
So another little side thing too is right now, just at this point in time in fall of 2023, there's a real dirge on trying to find work as an iOS engineer, and I know that you have part of the Dev Weekly newsletter, and I think you have a site where I've posted positions there myself when I was hiring.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so is that sort of another offshoot of, or a service that you provide, I guess, to the community, right? It
is, yeah. So I started getting, through iOS Dev Weekly, I started getting companies they used the sponsorship slot in iOS Dev Weekly to advertise positions, and this was a few years ago now. And over time, there was that demand there for people trying to publicize their roles that they had open. And then I added a section to the newsletter that was, jobs, and it would accept a few jobs every week. And eventually I kind of spun that out into a separate project, which is called iOS Dev Jobs. And that feeds jobs through into the newsletter, of course, but it's also its own thing. You can subscribe to a newsletter on iOS Dev Jobs and only get the jobs if you'd like to. So, yeah, I certainly have seen in the last year, I would say it was doing very well right the way up to the end of last year. And then this year has been... there's been a noticeable drop in available positions. And of course, I only see a small amount of them, but it's a noticeable drop. Yeah. Yeah,
it's a metric you can look at, and it's interesting to hear that. It's a tough time to find work, right, as if you're looking for work anyway. So as an independent contributor or creator of content, like I'm curious about the whole sponsorship side of things. Like how do you find sponsors for your various ventures?
Yeah, so like I say, when I started iOS Dev Weekly, it was not with the intention of making it into a money-making project. But as it grew in popularity fairly quickly, I started getting companies approaching me saying, do you accept sponsorship? And I, for a fair while, maybe like a year, I said, no, I don't. But every time I got one of those emails, I kept a note of the person's name and email address, because I thought, well, it's potentially going to happen at some point. And so when I decided to start accepting the sponsorship, I had a little pool of people who I could reach out to and say, are you still interested in doing that? Because now I am considering taking sponsorship. And that worked really well, because the challenge of starting to accept sponsorship for something is that you need to show that it works from the beginning, and at the beginning you don't know that it works because nobody's done it.
Right. Yeah.
And so you've got a chicken and an egg situation of like, well, I can't yet prove it. I can give general statistics or something like that, but I can't yet prove that it works in this context. And I had enough people sign up for initial sponsorships that I could then prove that it worked. And ever since then, with a couple of very isolated instances, the sponsorship has been entirely inbound. So companies email me. I have an inquiry form on the website, which people find and fill in, but then also lots of repeat sponsors, and yeah, it's full. In fact, it's full. The calendar is full until the end of 2024.
Well, that's great. It's great. Cool. So, right. Yeah, I'm sure there's something that fellow podcasters and people who want to do newsletters and things like that would want to know. Like, how do you find out? I recently went to we have a thing called Hot Docs here, which is documentary publishing thing. They have a podcast version of it, and I went there, and I was telling one of the speakers about our numbers in terms of who listens to More Than Just Code, and she was that's amazing for an independent podcast. I'm like, really? I thought it was good, but I didn't think it was great. You know. But anyway, yeah, you never know.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do want to just sort of get a general sense of you as being an industry pundit, sort of your perspective on where the ball is going with Apple. How do you feel about where we are in 2020, coming up in 2024? What we're seeing in iOS, what we're seeing in macOS, devices, hardware. How do you see Apple these days?
I mean, I think I don't in terms of punditry, I don't often talk about hardware, but what I will say is I think the current Apple hardware lineup is exceptional. The M series chips are just out of this world. The phones are great, iPads are great, Vision Pro coming along the horizon. You know, it's that side of the business is just absolutely. I have no notes for them. They're doing great. Carry on.
Good to know. Yeah.
So yeah, but that's not really something I've from the beginning of talking about the industry in the newsletter. I decided I didn't really want to get involved in the kind of rumor cycle. So like I don't talk about anything that isn't released. And not because I don't feel I can. It's just I don't really follow it. I don't really want to talk about that kind of side of the things. And I tend to limit myself to the software side as well.
Interesting. What do you think about iPad OS, iOS, Vision OS? What do you think about the state of the applications?
Again, I think the platforms are doing great at the moment. They are so mature and pleasant to use. I think, you know, there's obviously always criticism from somebody. You know, something changed and somebody doesn't like it. And I know there was a big kind of thing a couple of years ago when the settings app on macOS changed, and a lot of people didn't really like that. Actually, I didn't really mind that. I think it's fine. It's fine. It's a settings app, right? It has settings
at the end of the day, you can have one side you have people saying they want to have a merger between iOS and macOS, and then when Apple does something like that, they have a hissy fit, you know?
right, sure. Yeah, you can't make everyone happy. It's absolutely true that is the case. So yeah, I think the hardware and the platforms are all doing great at the moment. And in fact, Swift as a language, you know, one thing that has been really interesting to me is starting to get involved in Vaper and server-side Swift, which is what the Swift package index is written in, has really opened my eyes to the possibilities of Swift outside of the kind of Apple ecosystem, and that was always something that was kind of a goal of Swift. And I think actually in the last few months, year or so, that there are some interesting things that are starting to happen around that. So Swift on Windows is now very much a thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know how closely you've been following this, but Salim Abdul Rasul has been working on Swift for Windows for a very long time now, has been absolutely instrumental in bringing it to the Windows platform. And he now works for the browser company who make the Arc browser.
Oh, yeah, Arc, yeah.
And
big fan of that.
Yeah, it's actually... so I discovered it through his work on Swift for Windows, but it is also now my default browser. I was a die-hard Safari user since getting a Mac, and this is the only browser that has even managed to tempt me away temporarily, and it's been my default browser for a good few months now, so you never know. It may have broken the Safari spell. And what they're doing is they're building the Windows version of Arc in Swift,
Cool.
but not using any kind of cross-platform UI framework. They're not trying to port Swift UI to Windows or anything like that. They've made WinRT bindings for Swift, so you're interacting with the real native Windows APIs, but through Swift. And so they're building that browser in Swift, and it's a real project, and it's real work being done. And I don't know how close they are to shipping it, but I'm confident that they're going to be able to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, I kind of wondered. I was going to ask when you mentioned Vaper, because I hadn't really heard much about Vaper or server-side Swift in a while. I mean, there was a big push on it maybe a few years ago. There was lots of companies getting behind it, and it's kind of like the news from my perspective has dried up a bit. So, but you think it's growing quite well, doing quite well.
So it's a nicely mature framework now, and there hasn't been a kind of big headline release for a couple of years. In fact, we started Swift Package Index in kind of March 2020, and at the time, Vaper 4 was just in beta. It was kind of towards the tail end of Vaper 4 beta, and we started with that beta. And we're still on Vaper 4. You know, that's still the kind of major version that we're on. But there have been an enormous number of improvements to Vaper in that time. So at the time, and one of the things that a lot of people found challenging about learning Vaper was that it was fairly tightly integrated with Swift Neo, the Apple-authored networking library.
Right.
And that uses event loop futures to deal with incoming requests and kind of processing of concurrent requests over time. Well, I'll be I'll be quite candid here. I really struggle with that. I never really got it. But over time, Vaper has integrated async await, and so now we don't need to deal with event loop futures anymore.
Nice.
But it's all happened in a fairly backward compatible way. So actually, there was no point in the development of the Swift Package Index where we had to say, okay, we're going to have to take all our code and convert it to async await. There's still sections of the Swift Package Index now that use event loop futures because they were developed back when that was the only way to do it. And we've been able to incrementally upgrade the site into async await, and the difference in the code that you write is striking. And it's a very much so. If your only experience with Vaper was in the time when it was all event loop futures, I'd urge people to give another look now, because it's quite different. But it's all happened without a major version release, and I guess that's when people get excited about something again. But no, there's real work being done with Vaper.
So as a sidebar, I mean, I'm curious, as I'm a sort of closeted web developer. I've been doing WordPress and things like that forever, and PHP is my choice of back end, PHP MySQL. So I'm curious, so how do you host a Vaper site? Like, what are there services you can use? How do you have to put your own hardware up there? How do you host a Vaper site?
So the way that there are lots of ways to host a Vaper site, as you might imagine, but the way that we host it, and I should put a disclaimer on this section, I am talking not from, so Sven is absolutely the master of our hosting environment.
Okay, cool.
I'm aware of it, of course. I know how it
we'll
works,
put a link to his
well,
socials on the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do. Yeah, please do. I was about to say I know how it works, but I shall amend that to I have a rough idea of how it works.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, we host, kindly supported by Mac Stadium and Microsoft Azure, who provide our hosting for the site. And both of those companies have been, neither of them can do enough to help us. They are incredible with their support of open source software. So we host the web servers on Azure, and all of our hosting is through Docker. We run a Docker swarm with the web servers, but also we have a lot of background processing that goes on with the Swift package index. So we have tasks that are pulling down Git repositories and parsing package manifest files. We have another process that's fetching metadata from online sources like GitHub. We have several background processes that kind of support the web server, so they also run through Docker. And then one of the things that was, I think it's the best part of the package index is we test every package for compatibility constantly. So whenever somebody releases a new version of a package, we'll see that new version and we'll run 32 builds across all permutations of platform, iOS, Linux, macOS, Vision OS, even we support these days, and with the most recent 4 releases of Swift. So we'll compile with Swift 5.7 on iOS, 5.7 on macOS, 5.7 on Vision OS, 5.8 on iOS, 5. On and on. And that build processing, and what we get from that is compatibility. Is this package compatible with iOS? Is it compatible with Swift 5.7? And we display that matrix on every package page. But that part of the hosting of the system is an enormous part of it, and that's where MacStadium come in. We run our Apple platform builds on MacStadium. We run our Linux builds on Azure. So it's a fairly involved hosting situation because there's lots to it. It's more than just running a web server. But if you're just wanting to run a web server, that is an enormous amount less complicated than what we have.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like something you built over time. I mean, I'm curious, sort of from a point and click point of view. cPanel is sort of the standard on a lot of sites and stuff. But I do want to ask one question before we get into the fun part of the show, which I want to get to. Is the question is,
okay,
as if I had a Swift package that I had written and I wanted to publish it, so I generally get the idea. I publish it up to GitHub, but how do people, if somebody was like a neophyte, what's the Swift package hosting, getting up on Swift package directory? What's the 101 on that? As a former trainer yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So creating a Swift package, thankfully, is very easy. There's a command that you can run on the command line that will create you a template for a Swift package. You can then just start writing your code. Once you've done the hard part of writing the code, if it's in a GitHub repository, which most packages that's where they live, taking that Git URL and adding it to a JSON file, which is in an open source repository on the package index. That's the way that we add packages. So there's a page on the package index. So on the menu at the top, there's a link that says add a package, and if you click on that link, it will explain this to you. But the process, and there's a reason behind this process. It's not the smoothest process in the world, and I'd love to one day make it smoother. But we do want a little bit of a record of who added which package. You don't have to add your own packages. You can add whoever's packages you choose to.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But we do like to tie that action of adding a package into the index to somebody. And so the way that we do that, because there's no signing on the package index site itself, we use a pull request process in an open source repository. So we have scripts on GitHub that will automate the opening of the pull request for you. So you do just kind of paste the Git URL in, press a button, and in the behind the scenes a GitHub action runs and it opens a pull request, and we approve that pull request and it gets merged in. So it's a rather convoluted process at the moment, and that's the reason for it. Is we want to kind of just be able to say this is when this package was added and this is who added it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously from a security point of view, this is why we can't have nice things. I like to say, you do have to cover
nice
yourself.
things. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And one day will we add some kind of authentication system onto the site so that we can just have a text box where you can paste a package URL? Probably. Are we there yet? No.
Not yet. Yeah, cool. All right. So anyway, I want to move on to the fun part of the show. So I like to ask these questions. It's based a little bit on the work of Marcel Proust, the Marcel Proust Questionnaire, and a little bit of Stephen Colbert, who hosts a late night show in the US here.
I'm aware of him, yeah.
So if you're seated comfortably, we can dive into the questions. So the first question is straight up, what is your motto? What sort of drives you?
So yeah, I can. I don't know whether I have a motto. I don't know. I have nothing as kind of well prepared as a motto, but throughout my career, the thing that has always been important to me is not to hold on to something too tightly when it's not working. And if that means changing directions sometimes, then changing directions is a good thing. But don't hold on to the things that are maybe, deep down inside are not working or not going to work. Don't hold on to them too tightly. And that's guided me fairly well through my career. And really lean into the ones that are working. So package index is really working. So I'm leaning into it really heavily.
Cool. All right. What's your favorite word?
I know what other people would say my favorite word is, and that is interesting, because I answer almost every question with interesting. So yeah, maybe I think other people would say that my favorite word is interesting.
All right, cool. What's the best sandwich?
The best sandwich, that's a trickier question. Are we including hot sandwiches?
What is it? Is it totally up to you? Some people choose bagels. Some people argue about what a sandwich is. Yeah, exactly.
Right, yeah. So I think where I would draw the line, if we're going to get into definitions of sandwich, where I would draw the line is, I think some American definition of sandwich would include like burgers and things like that. They're not sandwiches; they're burgers, right?
Okay.
But I think there is a distinct hot sandwich, and I'm a fan of a hot sandwich. So maybe keep it super simple, like ham and cheese panini or something like that. Something like that. That's pretty good. Yeah.
Grilled on the outside.
I don't know. I feel like I could. Yeah. I feel like I'm gonna kick myself later for not thinking of my actual favorite sandwich, but
oh well.
Under pressure, what do you do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Who's your favorite hero of fiction?
That's pretty good. Pretty good question. I might take a second for that one. Hero of fiction.
Could be movies, could be books, could be TV shows, could be comic books, anime.
I think maybe I'll go with, was his name Arthur Dent?
Oh yeah, Hitchhiker's Guide.
Hitchhiker's Guide, because I think he made the best of a pretty rough situation, right?
That's true.
And does that go back to my go with what's working? I think he definitely went with what was working, right?
Right. Okay.
Went off with that choice.
So, what's the scariest animal?
I don't speak from any experience at all with them, but I think I have a little bit of a fear of snakes, and I'm not a big fan of. Actually, I'm not really a big fan of reptiles in general. If I'm honest, spiders don't bother me. I think spiders are our friends, and so I think that would be a lot of people's answers. But I'm not a big fan of snakes. Although they've done nothing. They've done nothing to hurt me. So it's an irrational fear.
Yeah, interesting. Where would you most like to live?
That's an interesting question. So, I kind of currently live approximately kind of Manchester area in the UK, and I've lived here for a long time. I grew up a little bit closer to Manchester than I am now, but in this area, and so I've been based around here for a very long time. In the last few years, I have had a kind of back of my mind thought of wanting to try London. I did think about maybe somewhere else in Europe, but that got unfortunately a little bit more difficult in the last few years. I think it would still be possible, but it's certainly a little more difficult. But I'm thinking of maybe giving London a try, and so yeah, it was not somewhere that I wanted to live until quite recently, but I'm curious about it.
So living in the UK, do you get down to London quite often, or?
Reasonably, in fact, I've got 2 trips to London before the end of this year, which is, there's only about 30 days left before in this year, so reasonably often, yeah. I really love it as a city.
Is there kind of a natural rivalry between Manchester and London? Like Manchester's a port city, like a boat building place, I think, right?
It kind of is a port. It's inland, but there is a very famous ship canal that goes all the way to Manchester. It's not an active port anymore because ship canals don't really have very many ships on them these days. Not the ones that are inland. But it was I guess a port at one point. I don't think there's so much of a rivalry between Manchester and London as there is between the north and the south. So the north, Manchester would be considered the north, even though it's only about halfway up the UK, and there is definitely a north-south divide in this country, but it's all very light-hearted. It's not an actual divide. It's a light-hearted divide.
Right. Okay. Cool. Window or aisle?
Oh, aisle.
Okay.
Yeah. Easy answer, that one. I don't really like the window seat because I don't like troubling people if I need to get up, right? I would much rather just be able to say, all right, I need to get up now. And on long flights, I do like to stretch my legs. So it's actually kind of funny. I remember, I don't remember which year it was, but one of the years that I was traveling across to California for WWDC, it's a very long flight from the UK.
Is it direct?
12 hours from London.
Oh, 12 hours, okay. Yep.
From London, you can get a direct flight. I have to then fly down to London first, so it's a few extra hours in that whole fiasco. But yeah, you can get direct flights from London. So I was on the very long flight to San Francisco from London, and I stood up to stretch my legs, and I went to the back of the plane so that I wasn't in anyone's way. I just stood there, and I can't remember exactly how it happened, but I ended up chatting to someone who was also on their way to San Francisco for WWDC, because I think it was the flight like 2 days before the conference started. Right. So the chances were reasonable. And then somebody else joined us, and before I knew it, there were 4 or 5 of us that were all on our way to WWDC who didn't know each other, but we all got chatting at the back of 747, and at that point we did start getting in the flight crew's way, because it suddenly became a little mini conference at the back of a 747.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, aisle, to answer your question.
Good answer. It's interesting. Like I've spoken a lot about going to conferences. I love going to them myself. I've been doing it for like even long before iOS. And I've met some really interesting people just around going to WWDC or 360 iDev or whatever. Actually, we were just
the first time we met was at a WWDC, I'm sure. In fact, I think the first time we met was at a James Dempsey event, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. So I'm a conditional breakpoint. Sometimes when he's around and I'm available, I'll play with him. But so, what's your connection to James other than the iOS community?
other than being a fan, absolutely. I think we met before the show started on. It was one of the events in San Jose. I don't remember which year it was. And I had reached out to James and said, if there's anything I can do, I'm more than happy to help. And so I think I did some on the door, and I came in a little early and helped set up a little bit, lifting things in from vans and stuff like that. But James is wonderful, and obviously all of the breakpoints too.
Great, cool.
Even the conditional ones.
Thank you. What number am I thinking of?
27.
Oh, you were pretty close. You got one of them.
Okay.
One of the numbers are correct. What's the most used app on your phone?
That's a great question.
There's an app for that.
Oh, that's the wrong phone. Oh, is there?
Yeah, well, you can go into screen time.
Oh, I don't have screen time turned on. But I can tell, because if you pull down from the top, you get the recently used apps. I can give you a couple of them. The top one is Discord, mainly because we use Discord for all communication around the Swift Package Index.
Okay.
We have a Discord community there for people who are interested in contributing, and the link to that is on in the README file of the Swift Package Index project if you're interested in joining us. And then I have New York Times Games, because I love both the mini crossword and the Wordle every day. The GitHub app is here. So you got 3 for the price of 1 there.
So we post our Wordle daily on our show Slack channel.
Okay.
I'm also doing Connections. Have you looked at Connections app, the Connections game in there?
I have. I rather embarrassingly, I find it really difficult.
It depends.
I have done a few, but that's not made it onto my daily list yet.
Okay, I don't do. My wife does the crosswords. I don't do them. Let's see.
What I really want, actually, if anyone from the New York Times Games division is listening, what I really want is something in between the mini and the main crossword. I find the main crossword is too time-consuming, and the mini is over in a minute. I'd love a medium. I
think, if I'm not mistaken, I think Apple's added Apple's added crosswords to the news app. I think. I don't know if you've looked at that.
Oh, they have. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I think just came up a couple of weeks ago. Like I said, my wife does. She actually gets a physical newspaper and does it with a pencil or the pen actually.
Right.
Because apparently, if you do crosswords, you only use a pen. But so back to the questions. Which living person do you admire the most?
That's a really difficult question, because there are lots of living people who I admire.
You can name a few of them if you like.
Yeah, to keep things in the context of what we've been talking about today and our industry and that kind of stuff, one person who I really admire is actually Ted Kremenek, who runs the Swift project. So we've had obviously some more interactions with Ted recently, and he is just absolutely true to his word in everything he says, and completely supportive of just, and really is leading the Swift project. Absolutely. I mean, I obviously only have very limited insight into that, because I'm not inside Apple or anything like that.
Right.
But I really, he has shown himself to be just an incredibly good leader of certainly what I see from outside in the Swift project, and I trust him completely with it, which is it's lovely to see somebody in a position like that and just have no questions about the fact that they are pushing it always in the right direction, and I really admire him from the interactions that we've had. And so obviously, if you take a question as broad as that, it can be anyone. It could be world leaders. It could be heads of industries. But I think probably, you know, a real experience is also very, very valuable there. And yeah, Ted's great, really wonderful leader of the Swift project.
Cool. And I think we have time for one last question, and it sometimes can be the toughest one. And it's been changed. James Thompson had me change the question.
Okay.
Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, or Babylon 5?
Oh no, I'm gonna make a lot of people angry here.
That's the whole point.
Well, I think in fact I might make everybody angry because I don't really have none of those really say a lot to me. I remember, I mean, I'd probably go with Star Wars because I have very fond memories from my childhood of going to watch Star Wars, but it's not something that really stayed with me. At Star Trek, I never really got into it. What were the others? Babylon 5. I don't know whether I've ever watched it.
I don't think I've watched the whole episode myself. Yeah. And Doctor Who.
Right. So, and Doctor Who, which is made in the UK, of course. Again, I have very fond memories of watching Doctor Who with my dad when I was 8 years old, and it was Tom Baker.
Yeah, he's the right doctor. Yeah.
But I never. Right. Yeah, no, I'm sure there were others, but the only one it was Tom Baker. Tom Baker was wonderful. So very fond memories of Doctor Who from my childhood. But again, when it got the reboot a few years, I don't know, probably a long time ago now, right? But the recent,
there were 13, 14 doctors. Yeah. Yep.
Right. Yeah, I've never got re-engaged with it after that. It was Doctor Who is a thing from my childhood, and that's about as far as it goes.
Where it stays. Cool.
But I know that's going to be a great disappointment to many people.
Well, it's an insight into what makes Dave tick. But yeah, I think we should wrap up because you got to get going. So if people want to get in touch with you, where would they find you?
So I don't really do a lot of social media. I do have a site where I do link to the various things that I do, which is daveverwer.com. And then the other place that you can get me is actually on the Swift Package Index Discord. So that's an open Discord, anyone can join. We are there all day, every day, because the Swift Package Index is the majority of what I do on a day-to-day basis. So,
and if people want to weekly catch up with you, they can subscribe to your newsletter too.
Of course, iOSDevWeekly.com is the place that you could do that. Yeah.
Cool.
I should have mentioned that one.
Yeah, no worries. Happy to help. All right. Well, my name is Tim Mitra, Timmitra, and that's where you can find me on the Twitter machine, the Mastodon machine, Blue Sky. What's the other one? Threads, Instagram.
Threads, yeah.
Yeah. And if you're watching on YouTube, I should probably say, hit the like and subscribe button. We need to collect as many subscribers as we can. So until next time, we'll see you in the future. Bye.
Thanks for having me, Tim. Bye-bye.
Thanks for being on the show. It was great to have you.
This has been another episode of the More Than Just Code podcast. If you want to find out more about the show, you can visit the More Than Just Code website at mtjc.fm. There you can find a summary and show notes of each episode. We list links to the apps, code, and news that we mentioned on the show. If you like the podcast, tell your friends. Please leave a comment on the website, and if you can, please write a review on iTunes. And please recommend us in your favorite podcatcher. All of these things help others find out about the show. We really appreciate your help with spreading the word. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd love to hear from you, so use the hashtag AskMTJC. Once again, the podcast's Twitter account is @MTJC_podcast. Please consider supporting the show by pledging any amount on patreon.com/MTJC. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.